There's snacks up here?
Yes, only for you.
Only for me.
Yeah. Nice socks.
Thank you very much.
Are they inside out?
Always. I always turn my socks inside out because they're always more interesting. Because you can see the fabric kind of.
That's pretty cool.
If you turn it, it's less interesting.
Boring.
Yeah.
I should try that.
Yeah.
Mine because they get dirty. This morning I was like, hey, do I have any clean socks?
I've gone into shops where they have just these very ugly socks, and I'll start turning mine inside out, and then I'll start buying them, and they turn all the socks inside out in the shop after that to sell them.
That's pretty cool. Well, thanks for making time.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate you coming. Do you want to spend a minute just talk about who's Randy? And then we'll jump into questions, and we've had a couple discussions around what we want to talk about, but why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm, before coming to Kleiner Perkins, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I started numerous companies, going back to sort of Apple 1.0 in the mid-'80s. Founded a software company we spun out of Apple called Claris Corporation, bought back by Apple. I then helped, I was the CFO of another startup called Go Corporation, which we sold to AT&T, which was in the pen computing business. And then I was the CEO of LucasArts Entertainment for George for a number of years. And then went off to run another game company for Kleiner Perkins called Crystal Dynamics. And then I kind of stopped. Oh, thank you so much. Okay. Then I stopped for a while and created sort of a new role in the Valley called Virtual CEO, where I would help manage a portfolio of businesses, partnering with the founders, not displacing them, and helping to develop the founders as well as the business. I did that for TiVo, I did that for Web TV, Mondo Media, Web Chat, a whole host of companies in the late 90s. Wrote a book called The Monk and the Riddle, which was a bestseller and led me to start teaching at Stanford, which I did for 8 years. And then I did only social ventures. I did Global Giving, and I did Mighty Light, a number of other social ventures, trying to experiment with bringing the venture capital model and the mentor capital model into the social mission business. And then in 2005, I joined Kleiner Perkins to bring my virtual CEO model of mentoring and developing early stage talent and companies to the venture capital business. And there I've done companies like RPX in the patent space, Nest in the Internet of Things space, and a host of others, some really interesting ones coming. So that's me.
I noticed you left out you're a lawyer, or
I was a lawyer,
recovering lawyer.
Yeah,
that's not a cool term in the Valley.
Yeah. So when I graduated from college, I did a couple of things all at the same time. It was kind of fun. I dress up in a suit in the morning with a tie and jacket, and I'd go off and help run a community development program for the city of Providence, Rhode Island. I did that until about 5 o'clock at night. I'd take off the tie, keep the jacket on, and go off and teach economics at a small college in the evenings. And then around 9 o'clock at night, I'd take off the jacket and I would promote rock concerts. And I promoted rock concerts for many, many years. Helped bring Newport Jazz back to Newport in Rhode Island. It was actually a great time. I was having such a good time doing that I went to law school because I figured it could not be a profession or a career if I was having such a good time. So I went to law school, did my penance by having a really bad time, and eventually worked myself out of the law. I was a litigator, trial lawyer for a while, eventually was a lawyer for, I represented George Lucas in the sale of Pixar to Steve Jobs, and that's how I got introduced to the Valley. I was then hired by Apple to come in and help run their legal department. And then I became an entrepreneur after that. So my legal career is way in the rearview mirror.
Recovered.
Yeah, recovered, very recovered, very recovered.
All right, let's talk about a couple different things. Kleiner's been in the news recently. One of the things was this discussion around acquiring the social capital venture fund from Chamath. That struck me as kind of odd, a big fund acquiring a relatively other big fund. What was the logic, or what was the discussion internally to kind of spur this kind of interest in acquiring another fund?
Yeah, I would say we never really got to a point of thinking about acquiring. I think we've always been fascinated with Chamath and Mamoon and Ted and the work that they're doing at Social Capital. They're doing terrific work. They're very mission-driven like we are. And they've got a fresh view of what's going on in the industry that we've always liked. We've co-invested with them in companies like Remind and in Slack. So and I think John Doerr and Mary Meeker, partners of mine, are also co-investors in their fund. So we've had a dialogue with them a long time. I think we really admire them and had many discussions about where they thought the industry was going, where we thought the industry was going. But it's, mergers in the venture capital business, there's not a lot of precedent for them. They're not easy to do. Funds don't sort of acquire funds. They partner. And so I think, those discussions led us to have, I think, a stronger bond as to how we can look at things in the future and join forces, which I think is an encouraging way to go.
Speaking of some of the investments you have, so I looked this up. Google, Zynga, Waze, EA Sports, Snapchat, Spotify, SoundCloud, Square, Uber, DocuSign, Slack. I mean, that's pretty much half of the unicorn club, right? So your fund must be doing well.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
And so, on the flip side, for a while you guys were doing clean tech and a lot of stuff that didn't pan out. And we talked about this. Do you think it was just too early or was it too big? We talked about this kind of now, these micro clean tech projects. Give us your thoughts on, those investments and, how it's shifting and changing now.
So, first of all, I think our work in clean tech was exactly what venture capital is supposed to do. Venture capital is supposed to go out and blaze new trails in areas that need capital to solve big problems. And clearly, there's probably no bigger problems on the planet right now than those that relate to the environment and sustainability. So our interest and our commitment to trying to find ways to use our network and our venture capital to come up with the right answers to those questions is exactly what I think the mission of a great venture capital firm is. I think that it was early in the sense that there's still, I think it was the first wave. I think right now we're seeing a second wave. I think we're starting to see more rational, investable opportunities in what I think about as sustainability, not just green. I also think that we didn't necessarily execute well. We started to invest in businesses where commodities were our competitors and we weren't really in the commodities business. We invested in areas that had required huge amounts of capital to take the risk out of the deal, and that's not the way venture capital works. We invest as little capital as possible early on to remove risk. It was very long periods of time, very large amounts of capital to remove risk in the clean tech area. As Nima talked about, with Nest and with a number of others in the low power area that we've got going, we've actually had very good returns to our investments in green, but we've done it in areas that I think are much more aligned with the venture capital principles of removing risk with as little capital as possible and having a shorter gestation period for the actual product and team than we were seeing in the green area. I do think that we're at a point, though, where we've come through that first tide of expectation, disappointment in green, and then the retreat. And I now think we're seeing a resurgence in a more rational market.
Speaking of big investments and failures, what happened to Fisker? I mean, a cool-looking car. I'll be honest with you, my buddy and I test drove one, and it felt like there's things that were not right yet, and this was like a prototype. But technically, Tesla, Fisker, what happened there?
Interesting enough, the Fisker, Henrik Fisker, who is the founder of Fisker, was actually working for Alain at Tesla as an outside consultant to help design their Project S. So the relationship was actually closer than you might imagine. It's very hard to build a car company. Talk about the huge amounts of capital and large amounts of risk that need to be sustained. I think the difference in my mind between Fisker and Tesla is less about design, because I think the Fisker product is a great product, and there were other great products in their lineup that were coming down the pike that people knew about, that I think people here in the audience would really appreciate. I think it's about having an incredible entrepreneur like Alain. Alon looked into the abyss and stared it down and came out the other side with a car company which is world-class and has created huge value for investors and for their customers. And I have incredible respect for him for doing that. So, a lot of times the success of a company doesn't come down to just technology. It comes down to those amazing people that lead them. And in that case, I think Alon was clearly the better leader.
Do you think that it was strategic, Solar City, Tesla, the batteries, and now the, what is it called, the home battery or whatever?
Yeah.
Was that strategic, or is he not that smart?
I don't know. Yeah, I think he's damn smart.
Of course he's smart. We know that.
I don't know how conscious he is of all these pieces working together. They might all be disparate pieces that ultimately sort of merge as the world develops around him. But it's certainly a very, very powerful portfolio that he's assembled.
All right. So you mentioned Nest. Do you think that Nest eventually will be kind of a home assistant AI where you can just say, hey, Nest, turn on my TV, and hey, Nest, turn on the washing machine? I mean, are we getting close? I just watched Ex Machina. I don't know if any of you have seen it. Really creepy because it makes me think that it's already here if they're talking about it. But when Google acquired Nest, I thought to myself, oh, they just want to be in the home and have people say, hey, Nest, or hey, Google. Yeah. What are your thoughts, and how close are we to that actually coming to reality?
We're probably closer than many people believe and further away than most of the zealots believe. There's a lot of pieces that have to come together. But on the other hand, a mere 5 years ago, nobody believed that self-driving cars would ever be allowed on the street. And already we're seeing them be accepted and legislation in place to provide for what I think will be a decade of more and more self-driving vehicles. Nest, so yes, when clearly the idea with Nest was way beyond the thermostat. When Tony Fadell and Matt Rogers and Eric Charlton came to me with the initial idea, and they showed me the thermostat, which was, after one sort of a Steve Jobs build of, we're doing this thing, and there's this little veil, and they pull the veil, and there's this sort of carved, round thermostat. Of course, it doesn't work. It's not built yet. But that's the big aha. I was pretty disappointed, frankly, because I know Tony a long time. Tony can do anything. And the fact that he was developing that product in that market, and that, frankly, was a market that we understood, the thermostat market wasn't a great market, was sort of deflated me a bit. But when Tony said that his goal was to do for all the unloved products in the home what he was going to do for the thermostat, which was to make objects of desire, that, like Ava in the movie, that you bring into the home willingly, without a thought to where it's going. Then he was going to unlock the power of those devices with software, but he was going to make them magical by connecting them. And that magic is the key thing. Those connections are the key thing. That's what Google bought with this group, was a group that doesn't just make these wonderful hardware objects of desire, but has a vision for how they all get connected and they share intelligence and they talk to each other. So we will see more of that. I expect we'll see this from Nest products shortly, sort of unleashing the power of what's inside Google with, I think, the vision of Tony and Matt and others. But I don't think we're in a brave new world yet. I don't think these devices are about to take over our lives and second guess us intellectually. I think that the alarm that's been raised about AI and how AI enters into our lives is premature. We should be cautious, but not alarmed.
Is Ava here? If you haven't seen the movie, it's pretty cool. It's creepy, but cool. You led the deal with Nest, and one of the observations I've made about Kleiner is, at least on the outside, is that you guys aren't really in touch with early stage companies anymore. And it seems like a lot of the funds are now focusing on bigger stuff. But when we talked earlier, you mentioned that a lot of the companies are actually somewhat incubated. So,
that's right.
So tell us a little bit about that, and tell us maybe the process with Nest, how long it took, or what were the steps involved, and tell us what you mean by incubating companies before you invest?
Sure. So I do think because we are a diversified fund. So we have a venture group, which invests in life science. It invests in digital and consumer and enterprise devices and software and services. And we also have a life science group, which is also doing extremely well in the marketplace right now. That's the venture group. We then have a growth group that invests in later stage companies, companies that have demonstrated success in their market, and we invest in their growth and development. And we've been getting a lot of press around that because those are where the bigger checks are written in later stage companies that are household names. So when I invest in Nest, that's not news for anybody because nobody knows what Nest is when essentially it's a carved device in somebody's hand and nobody's taking interest in thermostats. But when we invest in Uber, everybody gets excited because everybody knows what Uber is. So I think the misconception about where Kleiner Perkins invests their time and money is based a lot around the press and a lot of the news around the companies, the well-known companies that we do later stage investing in. I've never invested in a later stage company. I do only venture investing. I do almost only early stage, A stage investing. In fact, I don't think I've ever done a B stage company. And most of the companies I invest in, I help incubate. We have a small area next to our offices where we house early stage companies and thinkers and help them work through their ideas, network and develop relationships, strategically plan their product and their financing. I have 2 or 3 coming out that are still stealth. They're almost all stealth in early on, so you wouldn't know about them. Next year, you'll hear about a couple of others that I'm extremely excited about. I think they're big markets in food tech and in ag tech. But those are people who came to us with nothing. And we help to build their teams. We help them to raise their money. We help them to refine their product vision. That's the kind of work we do. We have a lot of service people around the organization that help with recruiting, that help with PR and marketing for our companies, and that also help with product. We have a design group run by John Maeda and Bing Gordon. Bing Gordon, one of the founders of EA. John Maeda, who was at the MIT Media Lab and then later at the Rhode Island School of Design. And this group does nothing but help our companies build better products and keys off of design and product. So we do still run the gamut, and there are a number of us who do nothing but early stage investing.
Awesome. So if we talk about the last few years as far as investment and disruption, I think AngelList kind of changed the game. Do you see any disruption happening in the coming years or a shift as far as what's going to happen with especially early stage investing?
Yeah, I think we've already seen a lot of that. I mean, our industry, like all of the technology industries, is not immune to change and competition, and we've got to be smart about how we do that all the time. The fact is that in the consumer digital space, it has gotten a lot cheaper and a lot easier to get products to market. And as a result, with a lot of capital around in the hands of young people who have had early success in Silicon Valley and have a lot of discretionary capital to invest, there's a robust angel market. And the small amount of capital necessary to get products out and the large amount of capital in the hands of angels with lots of discretionary capital, without mortgages, without families, means that there's early stage investment in the consumer space that changes my business, which means that I come in later, usually at higher valuations, but also with a lot more risk removed around product and team. It's probably a reasonable trade-off, frankly. But that's only in the consumer digital space. If you take a look outside of the consumer digital space, it's still a venture capital business to invest in early stage ideas, help these teams form, invest the significant amounts of capital necessary to remove risk in drug therapy or enterprise software. So it's two worlds. It's the consumer world that gets most of the attention because it's sexy and it is the focus of the online rags like TechCrunch, et cetera. But there's a much bigger world out there than consumer digital.
So you mentioned food tech and ag tech. Are those sexy? Are those hot?
Well, I hope
like
they
them?
are going to be.
Okay,
They're sexy with me.
Okay, good,
Yeah,
good,
they're
good.
sexy with me.
So if you haven't read Randy's books, Getting to Plan B and The Riddle and the Monk, they're awesome. Any plans for another book?
Well, I just did one. I did an experiment with a good friend of mine named Bayard Winthrop, who runs a company called American Giant, which, if you don't know American Giant, there was an article in Slate 2 years ago saying they made the best hoodie on the planet. And what they are is an artisanal apparel brand. And I really love these guys. I've known Bayard a long time. So I had written an article about artisanal manufacturing and artisanal brands, love brands, I call them. And the article got featured in Forbes and Fortune and a couple of other places. And we decided to sort of make that into a book, but we decided not to go through a publisher. We decided to self-publish through Amazon. We wanted to do something that was a faster cycle, smaller, like 50 pages, more high design, high concept, but wanted to get it out there and provoke a lot of thinking about artisanal brands, about creation of jobs in the community, about love in the relationship with customers. And we got a book out called I Effing Love That Company. It's only available on Amazon. We printed just a few number of copies, give to the press, but it's getting a lot of buzz as it sort of raises these concepts of artisanal brands, artisanal manufacturing, jobs in the face of the technology compression of jobs. Every time we create a great big company in Silicon Valley, we actually destroy more jobs than we create. And the idea of where are we going to create jobs on Main Street, companies that are small but prosperous, that are important but not venture capital scale. That's what that book's about. So we just got that out, and I like the experiment. It was a lot more fun than writing a book for 2 years and working with a publisher and then having to go off on the road and sell that book. This has been a lot more fun. I think we'll do more of these.
Awesome. One last question before we talk about the elephant. Investment that you missed or you could have invested, and other than, well, you guys invested in Uber, but what's the one where you're like, damn, I could have had that one.
It's interesting. You and I talked about this ahead of time, so I had time to think about it. And I'm going to try and answer the question I wish he'd asked rather than the question he asked, which is a trick I've learned over time.
Nobody listens to me anyway.
And I'll explain why in a second. The why is, look, I'm not a person who suffers from FOMO. I really don't care what other people are doing. If it's not a trend that I'm part of starting, I really don't care about the trend. And that's not hubris, that's just focus. And so I don't spend a lot of time white knuckling about what I missed. I really spend a lot of time worrying about what I invested in. And when I think about what I've missed, it's really about great people that I've missed investing in. Because I invest in people. I invest in people, in problems, in value propositions. I don't invest in traction, and I don't invest in business models, because that's always too late for me. I'm early stage. And so when I think about the people that I really wished I would have invested in, if I'd had an opportunity to, and I didn't, Alon is one of them. I think Alon...
That's the easy answer.
Okay, I'll give you another one. Reed Hastings. I think Reed Hastings is an amazing, amazing guy. I mean, the fact that what he's done is disrupted a multi-billion-dollar industry, took real chutzpah to do this, reinvented his business 3 times, right? From a DVD business to an online business to a content business.
Look,
I would have loved to work with that guy.
I lived in Los Gatos when Netflix was like 20 people. The stock was $3. And
did you predict it would be worth?
Well, the scary thing is I worked on a marketing deal with them to do a nationwide campaign around all these events. Anyway, so back then they had 600,000 subscribers, and they were paying $32 per person that you signed up. And so we had done these calculations. Anyway, so if I had taken 10% of that money and bought some stock,
see, there you go.
It'd be like $100 million.
There you go.
So I missed that boat too, and it wasn't because of Reed Hastings. One other last question. What's the hottest startup right now?
Boy, so the hottest startup area for me right now that I really like is the reinvention of education. And I really, really like Coursera and Udacity. Coursera is one of our investments, Udacity is not. I like them both. I do think that we're going to see unicorns in this space. I think we're going to see great big companies. You know, you see Corinthian just recently went bankrupt in the private education space. You see Starbucks now paying for education for its baristas, which is fantastic. Education is too expensive for the middle class, certainly too expensive for the poor. And we've got to see a reinvention of that on a global basis if we're going to develop the opportunity and potential, the human potential that we want to. So I'm excited by that area, and I think we're going to see more than one unicorn in that space.
Awesome. So ladies and gentlemen, I got a phone call yesterday from the Kleiner Perkins Police Department warning me that I would be sued if I talked about the trial. But because Randy,
it was not from me, by the
Randy
way.
had said we could talk about it, and we had a discussion. So I have some insights, so you can ask me privately. But obviously, we can talk about diversity and some of these issues in the Valley outside of what's happened with you. I've seen you lost a little bit of hair over this whole thing. But what are your thoughts as a newly not convicted, what's the other?
Exonerated.
Exonerated.
Please, exonerated. Let's get that right.
Not guilty, not.
Let's get that right.
What are your thoughts? What's happening in the Valley?
So look, I'm not going to talk about the trial because it is still in action, but I am going to say how I felt, which was I was really sad. I was really sad and very disturbed through this. And in part, the one thing I can say about the trial, I think, is how much respect I had for that jury. Because the jury did something really important that I think all of us need to do, and that is to separate the facts of this case from the really important issue of diversity in the Valley. It was conflated in this case. It was a bad case. Clearly, the jury was decisive in this case. They had no trouble finding us to be completely guilt-free in this case. That being said, the press had a bigger narrative, a narrative about the Valley that they tried to pull us into and resisted kind of the real facts in the case. And if none of you, I assume, were in the courtroom, so if you just read the press, it was easy to convict Kleiner Perkins. If you were in the courtroom with the jury, a very liberal jury, 6 men, 6 women, they had no trouble finding that we were not guilty. So what's the problem? The problem is that the narrative is a powerful narrative, and it's an important narrative. The case is not part of that narrative. The narrative is we need more diversity in this Valley. And when I say diversity, I'm not just talking about gender diversity. I'm talking about people of color. I'm talking about ethnicity. I'm talking about people who have physical challenges. I'm talking about older people who are being left out of what's happening in the Valley. And the reason it's really important isn't simply an issue of fairness. It isn't simply an issue of what is good for business, because diversity is good for business. It's also an issue of how important the Valley is to inventing the future of social dynamics. If you take a look at what's being created here in the Valley and what leaks out to the world, there's so much influence around how we interact, how we communicate, how we relate to each other, that if we do not have representation, diverse representation in that dialogue, in that discussion that is being innovated here every day in Silicon Valley, we are missing out on a bigger opportunity. And so diversity is an important issue. Kleiner Perkins has always been part of that discussion. 5 years before the trial, there's a piece you can see that I did online where I talk about this issue 5 years before the trial. Kleiner Perkins, it turned out, in the facts in the case, have the most diverse group of partners in the entire industry. But it's not enough. It's not enough. We continue to work every day to improve that diversity. We continue to lead our industry in setting the standards and the best practices for diversity. And I think as a group here in Silicon Valley, we cannot rest until we are more inclusive of people and points of view that help form the future. So diversity, that narrative, that's the issue, that's the important issue, and that's where we need to put our attention.
Awesome. All right. One question. I'm going to get in trouble because I always do this and we talk too much. Does someone have a question? Oh, perfect. No questions. All right.
Ah,
All right, one. Let's do it. Better be short.
Sure. I just have an idea, and so I'm just trying to figure out how can I get it to a place where I could, you know, find you, like a group like you, where I could, you know, get it going, get it to the next level. I pitched it to a company, and they wanted me to write a business plan. So right now I'm in a stage where I'm taking surveys to prove that there is a market for it and what people are willing to pay for it. So I guess my question is, what do I do? I mean, you know what I mean?
Talk to
yes,
people.
and I completely understand it. You know, the good news is in the Valley today, there are lots of people who will help early stage entrepreneurs think through and put their ideas in a format that can get in front of people like me. There are incubators that are, you know, there's the well-known incubators like Y Combinator, but there are also lots of other smaller incubators in places like Redwood City, San Mateo, San Francisco, where you can get the help and guidance that you need about putting things into a format that somebody like I can look at and make sense of. Coming to somebody like me without having that format really doesn't do your idea justice because of I'm seeing hundreds of ideas all the time, and the ones that are in a framework that I can understand and relate to are the ones that get the most attention. So it's really about finding those individuals and finding those groups and those opportunities to sort of mentor you and get your idea into a form that, by the way, is a process not just of packaging, but also of learning. So look for those incubators, look for those mentors that you can find to help you do that.
Awesome. We have to cut it off. Randy, I want to thank
It's a
you
real
so
pleasure.
much.
Thank you so
Pleasure.
much. Thank
I
you.
hope
One more?
This was fun.
No
Thank
more?
you.